Good evening, BookTube. It's Thursday, and I'm here with another essay by E.V. Lucas. This evening is concerning tea, and it's from his book published in 1900 by Smith Elder and Company called Domesticities, a little book of household impressions. And every evening I've been going through one of the essays in here every day. And we started out with concerning toast, then we went to concerning breakfast, then concerning walks, and today is concerning tea. Now, I've been giving a little brief summary of E.V. Lucas with every one, so I think I'll continue that, but I'll add a few things every time. But just the basics. He was born in 1868 and died in 1938. He started out at 16 being a bookseller, or apprentice bookseller. Then he became a journalist, and then he moved on to working for Punch, where he stayed till the rest of his life. He became a reader at Methuen, and later he actually became chairman there as well. And in later life, in the late 20s, he became a member of the Royal Monuments Commission, and he received honorary degrees from St. Andrews University in Scotland and Oxford University. And I've mentioned many times of how prolific he was, and that, he never slept, he never ate, and that he somehow squeezed 40 plus hours into every 24. And many have commented about this. One writer had said that he spoke less words than he ever wrote. Now, let's get to some of his words concerning tea. And I'll read the first paragraph here. It's concerning tea. The origin of tea, according to tradition, is as simple as it is creditable. Prince Dharma, in the remote ages, was a holy Asiatic who spent day and night in meditation upon the infinite. One night his ecstasy was interrupted by sleep. On awaking, he was so dismayed at this infirmity that he tore off his eyelids and flung them to the ground. The spectacle of a holy Asiatic flinging his eyelids to the ground deserves the notice of an historical painter. On visiting the spot later, Prince Dharma found that his eyelids had grown into a shrub. He had the wit to take some of the leaves and pour boiling water upon them. Ever after, by simply drinking a little of the precious liquor, he was able to keep sleep at bay and pursue his thoughts with added zest and profit. So, torn eyelids, tea. Yeah, makes perfect sense, doesn't it? Then he goes on to say the English history of the plant is comparatively brief. He talks about that, according to popular belief, tea came via Holland in 1666. Disraeli, though, says he thinks that the date was earlier, and the reason for this is a collector whose treasures included Oliver Cromwell's teapot. But Lucas, in his wit, sort of puts pay to this by the next sentence. This perhaps would be better evidence had we not all heard of the museum which possessed a small skull certified to be the head of Oliver Cromwell when a boy. Then he goes on to talk about how that in the Exchange Alley, a Thomas Garway, a tobacconist and coffee dealer, was selling tea for £3 sterling per pound weight of tea in about 1660. But it says that not, however, for a score or more years later was tea all that common, though Charles II's queen, Henrietta, she sipped it, and with gusto, he says, in Portugal, stamped the beverage with her approval to the court. And then And then he goes on to say that Southey, which was he was a late 18th and early, mostly 18th century, early 19th century poet, historian, writer extraordinaire. He had a massive library of apparently like 40,000 volumes, which would have been massive for the time. Anyway, he says the story is told by him of a great-grandfather, a friend of his, who made one of the party who sat down to the first pound of tea that ever came to Penrith. They boiled it in a kettle and ate the leaves with butter and salt, wondering wherein the attraction lay. Well, if you eat it with butter and salt, that might be the reason. And then he says the wise tea maker is suspicious of elaborate paraphernalia. The best thing, he says, is just a black pot that you boil water on a fire and have an earthenware or china teapot. And he basically says beware of copper kettles on tripods, silver teapots and kindred refreshments or refinements that do little to the leaf. And nor should strainers be desired. And he talks about a small spoon strainer that is made for a single cup of coffee. And he retorts, a single cup? Who, if the tea were worth drinking, ever wanted but a single cup? And he talks about it needs to be prepared correctly. And then he's going, a large pot is imperative. Few things in life are more maddening, few things in life are more saddening than the smallness of some people's teapots. And then he talks the usual thing that the teapot should be warmed with hot water, and the leaves put in like a spoon for each person and one for the teapot. And as soon as the water is boiling, don't let it boil at all. Just as soon as it starts boiling, you pour it onto the leaves immediately. Don't let the water boil too long or it becomes stale, he says. And then he goes on for a few pages talking about who makes the best tea. And he says here, men's tea, I think, excels women's. Taking them as a whole, one may say that no class of men make such good tea as undergraduates. Time is theirs, conveniences are to hand, and though they are young and ardent, haste and enthusiasm are bad form. Hence the brew has a dignity, a gravity, a composure worthy of it. There is something Asiatic about the reserved undergraduate, and today the conscious ones are all reserved. That stimulates tea to do its best for him. Later in life, when he has left the university and met a woman, the undergraduate becomes again an Occidental, and he mockingly says, his wife would say, look in this afternoon and try my new orange Picot. And then he says, just as men are more intimately interested than women in the making of tea, so are they often more subtly conscious of its merits. Women do not discriminate so calmly. Tea to them is tea. Tea to a man is China or India or Ceylon, golden tipped, overland born, and the like. It is not for men but for families that polysyllabic brands are put upon the market. And he talks about how many blends of tea are there, and that is why men who understand offer you better tea than women. I'll pause there for a second. You have to think, he's a typical Victorian. So take it as sort of a grain of salt that he does, I think that men are better making the tea. But he does correct himself. That's the one thing here. He says, but it must not be supposed that the art of appreciating tea is unknown to women. Nothing could be further from the truth. I knew a venerable lady with whom tea drinking was almost a religious rite. To her high back chair was first brought to the caddy, an inlaid casket with which was deposited on a table beside her. So she had this little tea caddy, had a lock to it. She had the key, and she would make the tea in front of everybody, and it would be like everybody would be treated like royalty, and the servant would take away the caddy, the lock caddy, and the key, and hide it basically. And he goes on to, the happiest tea drinkers are they who have generous friends in China. No tea is like theirs. That inscrutable humorist Li Hung Chang left presents of priceless tea in his wake as he passed smiling through the West. Tea with a distinction until then unsuspected by the few persons whose glory it was to taste it. And among these was Mr. Gladstone, great among tea drinkers whose pleasant humour it was to speak of a cup as a dish. Dean Stanley was among the tea giants. Dr. Johnson's prowess is a byword. Hartley Coleridge was another colossus of the caddy. One who knew him tells that once, on being asked how many cups he was in the habit of drinking, the poet replied with scorn, "Cups! I don't count by cups, I count by pots." And the commonest tea, he says, is black, and then he talks about, he goes into how it can be blends, and there's the graduated qualities of black teas, and how it can be strong, or strong and rich flavored, soft and rich, small, young leaf, magnificent liquor. It's all, he uses little quotes to describe how tea can be described. The late Arthur Cecil, the comedian, used to tell with great glee of the cannibal tea at Kew. Thus, tea plain, 6d. Tea with shrimps, 9d. Tea with children, 1 shilling. Of all the public varieties, the tea obtained at a railway station is perhaps the worst. And the liquor served in these carnivals, which are known to schoolboys and as tea fights or bun struggles, is a close competitor, but being free or inexpensive, it has an advantage over the station tea, which is costly. Then he goes that a ship's tea actually could be worse than a railway station's tea, but he says to say tea in the cabin of an ocean tramp would be worse, only that at sea one is too hungry to care for refinements of flavor. And so he ends there basically that that tea is a good beverage. And I love the story of the monk, or the holy person who tea came from his torn off eyelids. Makes you think the next time you make a cup of tea, I suppose. But yeah, as I was saying, that Lucas was a product of his times, like everybody is to a certain extent. And in a few of these, as I say, he talks about that women aren't as good as men at this. But then he turns around and then gives a perfect example where a woman is actually better than the man at this. So I find that kind of interesting. But in this day and age, there's a lot of people that will despair at that. But you take it with a grain of salt, as I say, and just enjoy the words and the wit that Lucas has. So that is day 4. The next one is concerning school hampers. No idea what that is going to be like, so we'll find out tomorrow. And I hope everybody's doing well. Here in the UK, things are beginning to move on with the virus, and they are contemplating locking London down. So we'll see what happens in the next few days. But I hope everybody's doing well, and I will see you tomorrow.